This is Chris Bushik with PDX Privacy.
This is Freddie Martinez with Lucy Parsons Labs.
This is Rory Mir with the EFF, and you're listening to
Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker. Today we have episode 328 for June 12th, 2023. We've got a great interview for you today, and let me set it up this way. I've been wanting to sort of extend the reach of my efforts here. For a long time, that meant focusing on increasing the size of my audience, trying to reach more people, help them improve their personal cybersecurity and privacy. Turns out that's a hard thing to do. With the podcast market and the book market are both very crowded, and it's really hard to convince people to even look for information or education about cybersecurity and privacy, let alone get them to subscribe to a newsletter or read a book or listen to a podcast about it. But last year, it sort of hit me, that I also should be encouraging my existing audience to try to help other people. And it's not like I've never done that, but it really just kind of hit me as a thought that, I really should be trying to leverage you folks, the people that are already care enough about these issues to pay real attention to them, to create some secondary and perhaps even tertiary impacts. That is a way that I could help more people by, convincing the people that are already following me in one way, shape, or form to go out and help others. So, to that end of last year, I created a set of coupons that you can download and give away to friends and family or really to anybody, as sort of a promise to help them with some specific privacy or security upgrades. Each coupon, has kind of a theme to it, and it's got, 3 to 5 different little subtasks, most of which map directly to tips from my book as things that I think are important things, but may be difficult for somebody to do or something that they might be inclined to do, but would do if they had someone to help them do it. Or perhaps if you're feeling really generous, somebody to do those things for them. And by the way, if you're interested, you can check those out. You can read the article I wrote about this. And in that article, there's a link to download the coupons. Go to fdsd.me/coupons, and you can read the article about that and find the coupons there. And by the way, I'm going to be adding some more coupons soon because that is part of this upcoming effort around giving away some of my cool Dragon Challenge coins. But stay tuned after the interview for more information about that. But today, I want to see if I can maybe inspire you to find or heck, even create a local group that focuses on advocacy or policy or education around an issue that you care about. That is another way that you can kind of get out there and make a difference. And it turns out that there are already support systems in place to help you do this. One of those, one of my favorites, is the Electronic Frontier Alliance, which is a subsidiary or part of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, who I've been talking up for years because they do amazing work. And we've had several people over the years interviewed on this show from the EFF. They are very gracious about making folks available for different topic areas. And today is no exception. We'll be talking with Rory Mir, who is EFF's Associate Director of Community Organizing, and they coordinate the support of the local advocates, primarily through grassroots stuff like the EFA. But we are also going to be talking with 2 folks who have actually done this, who have created Electronic Frontier Alliance groups, one called PDX Privacy and the other called the Lucy Parsons Project. And that would be Chris Bushik and Freddie Martinez, respectively. And so what I wanted to do with this is kind of show you, first of all, that it's possible that there are, if you are interested perhaps in doing this, that there are groups out there that can help you do this, and then talk to some people who have actually done it in coordination with the EFA and kind of get some of their experiences, what they've learned and what some of their successes were, and what advice they might have for you or someone who might want to get into this. So with that as our setup, let's get right to our panel discussion about getting involved, and in particular, the Electronic Frontier Alliance. Rory is EFF's Associate Director of Community Organizing. They organize EFF support of local advocates, primarily through the grassroots information sharing network, the Electronic Frontier Alliance. Welcome to the show, Rory.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
And we recently interviewed Albert Fox-Kahn and Evan Enzer from the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project in New York City, aka STOP. and which turned out was a member of the EFA, which I didn't actually realize till I interviewed them, and which made me think about doing this interview. So today we have two more EFA success stories to tell you about. The Lucy Parsons Labs in Chicago, Illinois, represented here today by Freddie Martinez, and the PDX Privacy from Portland, Oregon, represented by Chris Bushik. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Roy, why don't you give us a quick refresher on what the Electronic Frontier Foundation is all about? And then, because I don't think we've covered this before, tell us, how, when, and why it launched the Electronic Frontier Alliance.
Sure, I'll try to give the short version. EFF is a nonprofit dedicated to protecting civil liberties of all peoples of the world by ensuring technology supports freedom, justice, and innovation. It started about 33 years ago in response to some illegal raids by the Secret Service. That's a fun story for another time. The initial goal was to fund legal cases where civil liberties were being challenged in the digital world, thus the foundation in our name. Fast forward a few decades, though, we're no longer a foundation, but a nonprofit law firm, which takes on such cases ourselves, as well as an advocacy group. So we're not only defending civil liberties in the courts, but trying to shape legislative policy, public opinion, and the digital infrastructure itself with tools like CertBot and HTTPS everywhere. Mm-hmm. As for the EFF's scope, as I mentioned, quite big, all peoples of the world, in all intersections of tech and civil liberties. But EFF is still a relatively small group. Even now, we're the biggest we've ever been, but we can't be everywhere all the time shaping policy. And the only way to really effectively work in other locations is to have local experts providing some ground truth to our policies and really being in tune with what the community they're a part of needs more directly. So EFF has always tried to work with local partners on local issues, but it wasn't until 2016 when there was a swell of grassroots advocacy around privacy and surveillance, where the EFF decided to offer more long-term support by forming EFF's organizing team, which I currently lead. And our team is basically to be there for local advocates, even those that aren't in the Electronic Frontier Alliance, to help connect them to resources and support as best we can. But the Electronic Frontier Alliance is our primary project. It is a grassroots network of fully independent groups. The primary purpose is to be an information sharing network. So these local experts can talk to each other about their issues, get support from each other, and say, hey, this is working in my city. It's a strategy you might want to work with in your city. Here's a presentation I made. You might want to just remix it yourself and start from there. So you're not starting from scratch. And this includes, while EFF wants to offer our expertise and support directly whenever we can, we also don't want to be a bottleneck. So we really strive for it to be more of a mesh where groups are able to offer each other support, form coalitions with each other, even if the EFF isn't directly involved. The main benefits EFF does try to provide these groups, though, is holding space for these groups to meet each other and collaborate. So we have regular virtual meetings, some online spaces like a Mattermost chat server and an email listserv. And then, not for the last few years, but increasingly more in-person events where folks can meet up and strategize together. The other kind of bucket of support is access to EFF expertise in our network. So if someone has a piece of local legislation they want to get a lawyer's opinion on, pending capacity, we try to offer that. Technical expertise, connecting people to notable speakers they might have issues reaching out to directly. We're happy to kind of connect them virtually. And then the last form of support is access to EFF's platform. We try to do a lot of work to raise the profile of EFA groups and their work through our blog, our calendar, social media, etc. Just getting folks to know about all the great work EFA groups are doing. And then thank you for being a part of that and lifting up to EFA groups today.
Fantastic. That's awesome. All right. Freddie, why don't you tell us about the origins of the Lucy Parsons Project and what your role is there?
Yeah, so the Lucy Parsons Labs got founded about 6 years ago, and we're going on year 7 in Chicago, primarily as a group of friends who were interested in issues of like technology, its impact on civil rights and civil liberties. And part of the reason behind it was, there's always this kind of focus on places like New York or San Francisco or Washington, D.C. And Chicago's the third most populous city in the country. And so there was quite like a need for some kind of presence, but also kind of just a lot of us felt that there was no reason why we couldn't be the people doing that kind of work. And so it's great to have like allies like the EFF, but it's also important to recognize that like we can sort of operate autonomously and also become the experts in our own community and not really have to rely or sort of be there's not one bottleneck as Rory alluded to. And so that's the origin of the project, and we joined the EFA. So I think we were one of the first groups that joined maybe 4 years ago now. So it's been a massively successful project for us, and EFA's been we've been with the EFA for a long time.
So what is your role there?
I'm one of the founders and executive directors. Yeah.
All right, Chris, what about PDX Privacy, and what drove you to found that?
PDX Privacy is a nonprofit focused on privacy, government transparency, and digital rights in the Portland metro area. I had been involved with another EFA group, Portland's Techno-Activism Third Monday, since around 2015. And at that time, I was also volunteering with the ACLU of Oregon. The ACLU was set to begin working on getting a CCOPS ordinance in Portland. And CCOPS is community control over police surveillance. Basically, these ordinances put the decision-making about use of surveillance in the hands of the community members and their elected officials rather than police. So they can decide if any surveillance systems should be used and when it's okay to use them and in what ways. Well, I was, and I still am very interested in privacy and surveillance issues. And back then, I was looking to get involved in that effort. And well, after the 2016 election, though, things changed a little bit, and ACLU shifted their focus to more pressing matters at the time, like the Muslim bans and immigrant-related issues. So privacy kind of got shifted to the back burner, and I really didn't want to see that effort die. So I set out to find other people who cared. And initially, back in 2017, PDX Privacy was just me and a Twitter account, but I slowly started to find people. And while we're still on the small side these days, we're officially an Oregon nonprofit.
Fantastic. That's awesome. So you've already talked a little bit about, how you found the EFA and why you joined. So what sort of impacts has the EFA had directly on your organizations? Like, what would you say has been some of the things that they've helped you with the most?
I think a lot of cross-country collaboration. I think Chris, I met at one of these events talking about a particular surveillance technology, and that I don't think that would have happened without the EFA. And I think part of the thing that is really important for us, like Lucy Parsons Labs does a lot of research, for example, and we created a website called ChicagoPoliceSurveillance.com, and there's all of the documents that we had and sort of a explainer 101. And part of the reason behind that is we don't want people to reinvent the wheel. We want, our work to be helpful for campaigns. And so there has been, communication between us in Chicago and folks down in Portland about various things that they want to organize around. And so, I think really creating space where you're not creating the wheel, but recreating the wheel, but also like we just want to get our, organizing done and someone can come in and lend some mutual aid. So that's been a really important thing for us to see. And I will also mention that it is not unheard of for people across the country to get in touch, being like, there was this thing that was happening in my local town and we used your resource and we got this thing shut down, which is great because like, I think, no one wants to be sort of the bottleneck, but also we do also need to support each other across the country as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, how about you?
I've also found the collaboration to be very helpful. We have monthly meetings via EFA and we get actually twice a month, and we get to update each other on what work we're doing. And also you kind of get a heads up if, say, some invasive surveillance tech is coming to one city, then we all have a heads up that, hey, that might be headed toward us next, and we can share what worked, what didn't work. Then the meetings also have lots of great information. Rory and their team provide a lot of presenters that come and share knowledge on all kinds of things, technical issues, policy issues, even organizing related things like how to onboard new members. And it's been wonderful for them helping us promote our events and give some visibility to that. So we're very grateful.
Well, that sounds fantastic. I mean, it really sounds like kind of like the best of both worlds. I mean, it's decentralized to the point where you guys have full autonomy and that it's not getting in your way, it's not impeding you, and yet you get a chance to collaborate with a bunch of other people with other like-minded groups with, and I think it's really cool, for example, that, hey, we're seeing this new tech. Are you seeing this in your city? I mean, that's kind of cool, actually. I dig that. That's awesome. Roy, does this sound like typical stories for EFA groups to you? You know, maybe what are some other maybe types of organizations that have joined the EFA?
Right. Yeah. There's not a lot of typical groups or stories in the EFA. It's a really wide range of types of groups with different focuses. If I were to put it in terms of a Venn diagram, I think the three circles would be public advocates. So folks that are trying to shape public policy on the state, municipal, or institutional level. The other circle being community spaces. So like hacker spaces or maker spaces, or even art spaces that are trying to hold a community space. I keep saying space on this, but holding space for folks to get together and talk about these issues and express themselves on these issues. And then the last circle being grassroots educators who are like the group I got started with, Cypher Collective EFA member, that really focus on know your rights trainings, cybersecurity trainings, and bringing awareness of these digital rights issues to the broader community and folks that might not already be thinking about it and trying to get out of the bubble there. These categories exclude stuff like research projects and people making their own podcasts and the like, but this is kind of a helpful map of getting a sense of kind of types of engagement these groups are doing with their local community. There's also, worth noting, a huge variation in size. There are some much bigger groups, like a former guest of yours, Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, has salaried employees and established funding. And then it ranges all the way down to a handful of students at a university that want to raise these issues on their local campus. No funding, just people power. So there's a huge variation in kind of modes and size, and as well as topics. Plenty of folks focus on CCOPs and police surveillance, but there's also folks more focused on creative expression and hacker issues, voters' rights.
Well, I want to explain these things because I'm hoping the audience will say, hey, you know what, that could have been me, or I got an issue I want to pursue. So I'm really hoping to kind of show that anybody could do these things. So I'm curious, Freddie and Chris, what did you guys do before you started these organizations? Did, working for your group become a full-time job, or are you still splitting time with whatever your previous occupation or career was? And then I'm also curious, how difficult or scary was it for you to make these kind of commitments? What was it like for you deciding to start this whole thing up?
Sure. I was a tech worker. I was working as a software engineer. Night shifts give you a lot of time to do a lot of research. And I was always interested in, following the news, Ars Technica blog I would read every day. So I knew quite a bit about these issues. And I thought I was interested in them. How I got started was I just started filing FOIA requests.
Oh, really?
Because, public records requests and the Freedom of Information Act are incredibly powerful tools in theory, but when the rubber meets the road, a lot of the agencies that I was sending requests to would stonewall me, and I got very, very frustrated by that very quickly. And there's this kind of thing that happens where I guess like government officials just kind of expect you to go away, and I had a lot of free time on my hand. Plus, I kind of have a personality where it's like I won't give up the thing until. So I have a very obnoxious personality, and so I sort of decided that I would spend years of my life fighting over records requests, and that was quite fruitful. My first FOIA request ended up taking multiple years to litigate and made sort of national news, and so I kind of got the bug and realized that there was something.
It made national news? What was it?
I was we were fighting to get records around cell site simulators and how police were deploying them and paying for them and things like that. And it ended up actually being many multiple year investigations. So I began this investigation into like cell site simulator technology and how it was being paid for and where it was being used and all of these things. And so it ended up becoming like a national story. It ended up being, it ended up being big, and maybe because I was lucky, but it was my first FOIA. And so, that kind of became a hobby of mine. And then over the years, I sort of became an expert on FOIA because I became an expert on how to fight denials and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the origin story for how I got started. But yeah, just like a bored tech worker who really was following these issues closely and just decided to start sending requests and investigating things in my own backyard.
So is this a full-time thing for you now, or are you still splitting time with your software engineering job?
No, I'm not a software engineer now. Yeah, I mean, like my job now, I'm a full-time researcher, and I've been sort of documenting, and I've been sort of an expert on police surveillance for a couple of years now. So now it's my full-time job.
All right, cool. Chris, how about you?
I've done a number of things throughout my career. My background is in electrical engineering, and I used to be a rocket scientist.
Really? Oh, that's awesome.
For real. And I also used to mix bands. I worked in software. I wrote articles for an audio magazine. These days, actually, when I'm not doing privacy work, I build electronics for the film industry. So I am like all over there, but I've always cared about privacy, and I've been aware of all the kind of surveillance and the hacking kind of things. And I think I'm one of those people that kind of, with the Snowden stuff, I just kind of like started becoming more and more aware of that and caring more about it and seeing how our privacy is being invaded. And I just wanted to do something about that. And that's where I got my in. I've also tried FOIA requests, but I'm not quite as good as them at them. And Freddie and I had spoken about those because I was asking, how do you get all these records? And I've not had as good of luck. I guess I don't know what it is, but if I keep trying, I get some.
You got to work a night job. Overnight shift.
That's it.
Well, it's not surprising to me that you mentioned Snowden. I had so many people mention that, and that's something that over the years, like I'd gotten kind of jaded thinking, man, when the Snowden stuff came out, that inspired me as well. That really got me. That's why I wrote the book and started me down the path that I'm on now as well. But I kept looking back thinking, man, I really thought that was going to have a bigger splash. I really thought that more things were going to change. There was going to be a bigger stink in Washington, and there was going to be all this, systemic kind of changes and things. Like, now that it's been exposed, it just felt like nothing happened. But yet, over the years, as I've interviewed more people, so many people have said, I started doing what I'm doing after the Snowden revelations. So they did have a lot of effect. It just wasn't the effect that I thought they would have had at the time. So I'm guessing that some of the things that people would worry about if they wanted to start something like this is, okay, the things I want to do are going to cost money. And I don't have a lot of money, or at least I don't have the money that I need to do what I think I need to do. So, Rory, I mean, I know that EFF doesn't, give financial investment into these things, but do you know of grants or programs that people could apply to? Like, for instance, the Library Freedom Project that Alison Macrina did. I think she applied for some grant, got got $250,000 for that, which is huge. I mean, I'm sure that's not a normal story, but are there grant possibilities or other funding sources that people could consider that they might not think about?
Yeah, and Alison's great. But I think I want to qualify this with, I'm not an expert in seeking grants. It's its own area of expertise, which is why I think it's really good if you're kind of starting out from scratch, reaching out to local librarians that are familiar with these grant databases, because often the biggest thing that when you start a group, you don't necessarily know what you don't know yet about these grants and what's out there. And a lot of them, especially micro grants, you might qualify for and not realize that they exist even. So I think definitely finding local support like that. It's been a growing priority with the EFA as well to share information about these sorts of grants. So the EFF dev team will sometimes share grants. We encourage EFA members and the public to check out EFF.org/thanks, and you can see which institutions are supporting EFF's work. And if you're an EFA member, it'll give you some ideas of folks to reach out to. There are also some EFA members who themselves offer microgrants. Calyx Institute, for example, offers microgrants every year that some other EFA members have successfully gotten funding from. The other qualification is to seek grant funding. Unlike direct donations, you will need to be incorporated or have a fiscal sponsor, which kind of increases some of the complications of organizing, especially when you're starting out. So I think it is often a good idea to start with investing your time and investing your work, and then seeking these bigger financial responsibilities once you know the direction you're moving in more confidently.
All right, so you said microgrants multiple times now. I've never heard that term. Is that's a thing? Like what does it mean to be a microgrant? And then I'm curious, like this sounds a little bit like applying for scholarships, like back when you were in college. Like there's a ton of them. Like there's people with money with nothing better to do that are looking for causes they care about, and you got to find them. That's the hard part. You got to find them and figure out what they're giving away, and then you've got to apply. So I'm curious, like how difficult is it? Like is it a multi-step process with writing lots of essays and business plans and crap, or does sometimes you just go to the right person and say, I want to do this? I'm like, okay, here's some money. How does this work?
Yeah, so my understanding, and I'm curious if Chris and Freddie probably have more direct experience than I do, but microgrants are often just a one-off smaller sum for a particular project. So the commitment is a little bit smaller, but also the amount of money is a little bit smaller. And yeah, my understanding is it is pretty similar to putting in an application, like a job application. You have to be able to sell your work and your writing about it and convince the organization that this will be a good investment for them, that it'll have a disproportionate impact versus how much they're putting into the project. My work with Cyper as an EFA member, we never had a grant successfully accepted. So I'm curious what the other folks on the call think.
Yeah, Chris, let's start with you. Like, have you tried applying for grants? Was it difficult? Were you successful in getting them? I mean, I know that funding can be kind of an awkward topic to ask people about, but to the extent where you could talk about these things, tell me what your experience has been.
We have not applied for any grants yet. There was one that Rory mentioned through EFA that we considered applying for because it seemed pretty related to our work. There's this chicken and egg aspect of the work too, though, that you need money to do things, and then also though in order to get the money, you have to have the ability to do the work to get the money.
Right.
And so you need people, but you need money, but how do you get them in the right order at the right time, mix them together? So our funding has been just small donations kind of things. And as a small organization, we don't have a huge number of expenses at this point. But there are things, for example, record requests in Portland cost a lot of money. They try to make it challenging and expensive so you don't get records.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're basically funneling money to the city just to not give you records. But that's one potential expense. But if you don't have the money, you can't file the request. But if you don't file the request, then you don't get the data that might help you later to get a grant.
Right.
It's kind of a roundabout thing.
Freddie, how about you? What's your experience been?
Very much the same. There is a lot of self-funding, or not self-funding, but just kind of a circular, I think like the DIY, I'm going to DIY it. I grew up as a punk kid, and then in the 2000s, that can kind of work for a little bit. But also, like, we were quite lucky that at least in Illinois, when you file lawsuits for public records, if you win, they have to pay your attorney fees. So I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years, and I've never had to pay attorney fees. Quite the contrary, they have bought many dinners for our attorneys and I for failing to turn over records. So that's been helpful. But the other thing also, just on a serious note, is that we get also like small donors, but we've been doing this for so long that when we do ask for donations, people usually provide, and it also means that we can support like local organizing on the ground with our research or things like that. So there's kind of like it's a kind of a hybrid approach where, yes, we do rely on individual donors and things like that, but also we help people on the ground, and that builds a lot of trust in us. And so it's quite easy to ask for, we need $2,000 for FOIA budget for the entire year. I mean, that seems like a lot of money if you have no money. But you break it down and it's, $10 between, or whatever, you do the math, right? It's between 100 people, it's like nothing. So that also helps quite a bit too.
Well, I meant to ask this earlier, and I'll swing back to it now. What are obviously, I think that Stingray thing was really cool, but I'm curious, thinking back at the things you've managed to accomplish, what are some of the things you're most proud of with your respective groups? What were some of your key successes? Maybe the things that kind of gave you new life or gave you that inspiration to like, okay, we're doing it. We're actually making a difference here.
I think for us, our biggest accomplishment is probably getting the facial recognition bans that were passed in Portland in September of 2020. Several cities had already had bans in place that banned the use by public agencies, but Portland was the first to pass a bill banning use by private entities as well.
Oh, wow.
And since then, New York City and Baltimore have also passed bans. I believe some other cities have been working on it as well. I'm not sure how that's going for them, but that just seemed like it was something like our biggest thing. And
now, did anybody in those cities contact you? Were you working with Baltimore or New York City in any kind of way, or did they?
No, we've not.
But yeah, I'm sure you could have been an inspiration for sure, right?
I would hope so. I mean, some other groups like in Washington and some other places had reached out to us to ask, what we did and how that all worked. And we're happy to share whatever we know, but we didn't have anything directly to do with New York or Baltimore. We're just excited to have them along as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm sure it served as a model, if nothing else. And Freddie, so you talked about the Stingray thing, which is obviously very cool. Any other stories you'd like to highlight from things that you guys have done?
Yeah, so we've been part of a campaign called the Stop ShotSpotter Coalition.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that don't know, ShotSpotter is like it builds itself as a gunshot detection system, but it's really just a bunch of microphones all over this country or all over the city, and then it'll hear a bang, and then it'll send police to deploy. And the reason that I'm quite proud of that campaign is kind of a very personal reason, and that there was a young kid, he was 13 years old, named Adam Toledo, who was murdered following one of these alerts in Little Village in Chicago, which is where I grew up. And so, like, watching the police footage of that murder was quite shocking.
Wow.
But it also meant that when people were asking questions about what is this technology, how does it work, how does it not work, I felt like I could put a bit of my, I felt like I was putting myself into like the campaign, but in a very personal way.
Yeah.
And I felt because I think a lot of it is just it was deeply personal, but it also was like I felt like I could turn that sort of feeling of that could have been any of us into something a little bit more productive. So yeah, that one in particular resonates with me quite deeply.
Rory, what were some of the other big success stories from the EFA? Obviously, we talked about Stop and these guys here. What are some other stories you might want to highlight that were EFF-related projects?
Yeah, so thinking about our work with the EFA, it's always a delicate thing because we want to be in a supportive position and not claim other folks.
Right, yeah.
But I think being supportive of campaigns like the ones mentioned is a major highlight, but even just anytime we engage a group that hasn't formally been engaged on these issues is the type of win that I always look forward to. Most recently, EFF joined a few other organizations, principally CDT, and opposing the reintroduction of Earn It.
Mm-hmm.
And the organizing team did a major outreach within the EFA network to find folks to support the opposition of Earn It again. And happy to say we were able to activate 15 groups, many of which hadn't been involved in the former opposition to Earn It. So I think, any opportunity we have to bring these issues to these community groups that are, already involved in their local stuff, but being able to bring them on board to EFF's work is what I get excited about in the position.
So, Freddie and Chris, what were some of the things that maybe surprised you, or what were some of the things that we found most challenging? Like, what did you struggle with maybe early on, or something like that? What, just getting real. What were some of the things you dealt with?
I think part of it is breaking through the bubble. That there are people who have name recognition, and being recognized as an expert, especially when you're coming to the work as maybe like through lived experience, or because you're a formerly incarcerated person, or because you're a student under surveillance, right? There's sort of this power dynamic that happens until you have sort of a name. But so that was a challenge. There's definitely a lot of times where I felt like I was overlooked because I wasn't from the right organization or had the right sounding name. So that was the first challenge. The second one I would say is, and this came a little bit later, was staying like finding joy in the work, because at some point it felt like I was doing this so much on my own free time, and because I thought it was like important, but being a bored tech worker and just firing off FOIAs and doing it because you think it's fun and interesting is different than so for a while it really did feel like I was just doing this thing because I thought it was work, and so just staying like we got to have fun in life, and realizing that like we do need to like just do things because we enjoy them, not because they feel like work. So that took a bit of decompressing, and what was really helpful in that case was bringing more people on and expanding and taking less on, and so that was kind of how we tackled that issue.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Chris, how about you?
I could so relate to those things. Initially starting out, I didn't really have any idea how to start. And one of the things I found was I think it was the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy or something. They had a whole bunch of courses online for free that you could take to learn about fundraising and things like that. I started there, and then I went to the like Small Business Administration, kind of looking there, and they don't really help nonprofits, but they still have information like business plans and things like that can help. But trying to figure out all the infrastructure stuff is challenging. And then also, again, the stuff about like having the capacity to do things. That's one of our biggest challenges now. Like right now, the city of Portland seems to be working overtime on trying to get all kinds of surveillance in place. They're doing gunshot detection systems, drones. There's a new spy plane. They're working on body-worn cameras. There are all these different things that are related to our areas of focus. And one good thing, though, is they're working on, the city just passed a surveillance policy resolution. And now they're working to come up with an inventory of all the surveillance systems. And there are other elements to that, but we've been involved in that process, but there's so many things to pay attention to. It's really hard to not miss them. And we are a small group, and we are all volunteer, and everyone has other jobs. So we're doing our best, but we do miss things sometimes. And it's hard because there are things like, say, ShotSpotter or one of those other companies, they have investors with tons of money. They're looking to make profits. So they're putting their money in there, hoping to get a return. And then, so they're well funded and they have lots of power that we don't have. So it's kind of daunting and just a challenge at times.
Well, I think
it's always a challenge.
Yeah, right. I hear this and I kind of think like kind of Aaron Brockovich kind of like imposter syndrome thing, where it's like, do you run into this situation where like, I'm just a regular person, what am I doing here? I'm talking to, big shot lawyers or big time company PR folks or law enforcement, and these people do it for a living, and I'm just never running into this feeling like, am I outclassed here? Am I really doing this? And have you gotten over that, I guess, is maybe the more important question.
I think yes and no. I mean, I do like tell people that the person you're talking to on the other line is still, a person who, maybe went to school for these things, but by no means does that mean that they're like an expert, right? Just because the police chief says something doesn't mean he actually knows what he's talking about, or he or she. And and oftentimes we're sort of fighting with nameless, faceless government bureaucrats, and
Sure.
Sometimes you have a good time at the DMV, and sometimes you're there for 4 hours. So, and then like I think the other thing that's been really helpful for us is sort of what I like to call like the healthy distrust of authority, where it's like, sure, it might be like a public official that you're talking to, but also, like at the end of the day, we're sort of trying to bring this we're bringing our power from the bottom up, and anyway, so like, yeah, you treat people with respect and stuff like that, but also that we shouldn't confuse like that with competency or rightness or fairness, or that they're correct. And so just sort of being skeptical of authority is also really helpful.
Right. Those people are just people too. And they make people mistakes like everybody else does, no matter what uniform or title they have, right? Chris, have you struggled at all with coming up against these more entrenched, more experienced companies with name recognition or fancy titles or whatever? Do you feel, what am I doing here? Have you run into that? Maybe you haven't.
As far as the outmatch part, I find like some of the companies will try to, even with the facial recognition bans, I think Amazon spent $20,000 trying to influence that legislation. So I don't have $20,000 sitting around to try to buy the laws I want.
Right.
I mean, they didn't get their way after all, which was good. But some of that, when you're going up against big companies like that, or even like the police unions want things, and it does feel like the David and Goliath kind of thing sometimes. Like you just, how do you come up against that? And on the other side, that's been kind of cool. Like I got a call from, I got contacted by Tom Simonite at Wired and wanted to talk to me. And I'm like, if you want to talk to me, that was kind of cool. And then the city auditor asked us for input when they were investigating. They did an investigation on police use of surveillance during the 2020 protests. So they contacted us to ask for input on their audit. So that's kind of cool that, so there's like cool and also frustrating things.
Sure. All right. So, Rory, let's say, I have a cause that I'm passionate about, whatever that may be, and I want to get involved. Often the simplest thing, and I recommend this often, is just to find an organization already doing something in that area and just throw money at them. I mean, it sounds crass maybe, but I mean, these organizations need money to survive. And so oftentimes the easiest way to support causes is to donate to people already out there working on those causes so they can, keep doing what they're doing, or volunteer time, another thing you could do as well. But if I'm trying to search for one existing group, either at a macro level, like maybe some bigger organizations like EFF or CDT or whatever, that I'm trying to find groups that are fighting for the causes I'm interested in, or at a local level. Do you have any recommendations for how people might go about doing that research and finding those groups they can connect with?
Definitely. Yeah. So first of all, I'm a little biased, but EFF.org/EFA, you can find all of our great EFA groups and their websites, most of which have donation links, so you could right away find your nearest group and support them a bit. I think another good strategy is looking at the type of coalition letters that bigger organizations you might be familiar with, like EFF, are signing on to, and reading through that list, you'll often find local advocates included with their location and their name. By doing a little bit of research there, you can find groups that are aligned with the bigger groups you're familiar with pretty quickly. But if you're really starting, you have no idea what's going on in your area, it is often things like meetup groups or Facebook groups even are ways to find what people are actually already doing in your community. Especially, there might not be a great privacy advocacy group in your town, but there might be some technical meetup group that is doing some kind of playing cyberpunk or something on Fridays. So I think you can find like-minded folks that way, and that could turn into something later on. And then, of course, word of mouth. You might not find groups that are directly related to digital rights, but you are interested in other areas. For example, criminal justice and racial justice groups will often already care about these issues and know the other groups that care about these issues as well. And you can network from there. So I think those are the kind of most curated passive to most active researching things I would advise folks to check out. And I think Freddie has some other thoughts. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think all struggles are local struggles, right? So there's always an angle, kind of to what Rory was alluding to, right? So if you're part of your local school district or whatever, I think, or parent-teacher organization, like those are great places to remain. And there's always going to be an angle where these things sort of intersect, because like all struggles are kind of the same struggle, it seems like. So if you're struggling with like, how do I do X, Y, and Z, like you might already be situated to bring stuff forward. But again, like if you're part of the parent-teacher organization, like you might not think that has anything to do with privacy or whatever, but a lot of our fights overlap, right? Like there's a reason that the abortion rights were found in privacy rights, right? And so, which doesn't seem obvious to a lot of people, but it does mean that if you care about things like abortion access, then you also care about things like privacy, and that might be a place to get started.
All right, Ray. So I've tried to find a group. I didn't exactly find the group I'm looking for the cause I want to start, or maybe there's not a local one and I want to start a local one. Now we're in your camp. I want to do something, and I'm thinking, you know what? I remember that podcast with Carrie about the EFA. Maybe I want to start my own group and align myself with that. So how do I do that? Like, what is my first step if I wanted to get involved with the EFA? And then there are other groups, as you mentioned. You guys aren't the only gang in town. Are there, for some reason, is there another group I might approach, like the ASLU or CDT or EPIC or some of these other guys? What advice do you have for someone who wants to take that next step?
Yeah, definitely. So I want to definitely caution against over-preparing. I think setting your first event, getting your first plan in motion is how you're going to get those initial rewards that keep you coming back to the work and make it something sustainable that then you do want to build up and you want to develop more. So I think finding initial ways to reach out to folks in your community and get something started is something I'd recommend. Once you have something going on and kind of a better plan of what you want to do, there are a few resources. One, again, EFF.org/EFA. We have a handful of toolkits. We're hoping to expand more this year, so look out for that. That kind of give organizers some initial advice on how to hold a successful event and how to reach out to the media to get coverage of your work, and kind of these initial things that are really helpful for breathing life into your work. We also have an EFA member, Aspiration Tech, which hosts a number of convenings and has some public materials on grassroots organizing and how to be an effective facilitator and engaging local community. And then there are some broader resources like indivisible.org/resources, which I've personally found helpful in looking through. And yeah, those are some of kind of the starting points. And I want to also encourage folks, if you have a project going, reaching out to organizing at EFF.org. The organizing team, you don't have to be in the EFA to reach out to us. Pending our capacity, we're happy to kind of give some initial advice or even have a one-on-one chat to talk through your plans to see, what we've seen work in the past and what you might want to do in the future. So those are kind of the initial resources I'd offer folks.
Well, and I think that was fantastic advice. And I could totally echo that from my personal experiences, that set yourself up for some wins. Like make sure that you've got something that's kind of giving you some positive feedback and kind of filling your tanks, because at some point this thing does become, it's one thing where it's an idea and you're all passionate about it or whatever. And then the rubber meets the road and you got to like make stuff happen. You got to fill out forms, you got to file grants, you got to get turned down. And, there's all these things that can be roadblocks and can kind of trip you up and slow you down and add friction to the whole process. And it really, really does help. And I could tell you from my own experience that, just getting that positive feedback from something, some sort of little success can have a really big effect on keeping you going. So yeah, I would totally echo that as well.
Yeah, I've been a part of a number of failed community groups that got too caught up in figuring out our governance structure and like our year plan and like all these things, and it sucked all the fun out of it and all the kind of initial reward for engaging with the community. People are social generally, and the sooner you can get in front of other folks in your community, I think the better.
If you had to do this all over again, what would you, if anything, what would you have done differently?
I would have hired an accountant and a bookkeeper much earlier. A lot of the minutia, learning to file things with the state government. Like, I realized that there are companies that you can pay to file the paperwork on time and things like that. So I would say that was a major one that I learned.
So another thing I wanted to get your guys' feedback on is, when do I need to think big and start thinking about, do I need to make an LLC, or what is a 501c, or, do I need to do kind of these scary legal things that means I need to hire a lawyer or an accountant or whatever? And when do I just need to, I've got a local meetup group, and we have free online Zoom seminars, and we talk at the local library or at the senior center. There's all different levels you could be doing things at, and you can be very effective without probably having any of this legal stuff involved. But in your experience, when do I need to be thinking about some of these things? When do I need to learn these terms? When do I need, Freddie mentioned we should hire an accountant earlier on. When do I know that I kind of need to be in that space?
I was in that process trying to figure out all that for us, when I was first starting, and someone advised me to not become a 501c3 until we were told that we needed to be one. Say if we applied for a grant where that status was required, then that was the time to apply.
So let me just stop you. What is a 503c? Because I'm sure a lot of people out there may have heard the term, but they have no idea what it is. And other things social purpose corporation and LLC,
It's a nonprofit corporation that's tax exempt.
Okay.
So we are not one of those yet. We are an Oregon nonprofit, but we don't have tax exempt status. But there are a lot of things that you have to do, and I'm still learning a lot of the things, but there are rules where you can only do certain activities. You can't really lobby.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a tiny bit of lobbying, but you can't make a profit if you're a nonprofit. But there are a lot of rules so you don't lose your tax exempt status. The thing is, just even applying to be a nonprofit has opened up the gateway for paperwork, because now we have to file taxes, and we have reports to the Secretary of State in Oregon. We have the reports to the Oregon DOJ. So there's a lot of work that takes away time from your mission, and it's not the kind of fun stuff that you signed up to do. So I would recommend holding off on that stuff as long as you can. I mean, but then, once if you want to get money though, then you have to have a bank account, and if you're getting money, then you're going to have to file taxes. So there is a certain amount of stuff that you have to do if you're going to accept donations. As far as like lawyers and accountants go, we don't have an accountant yet. We're looking to get one to like set up our books more officially, but not, just to have one in case we have some accounting questions. But as far as lawyers go, we found there's a local college near us, a law school, Lewis and Clark Law School, has a program where they help small businesses. So that I guess their students help you for a much reduced fee. So we did get some advice from their lawyers at one point, and we will go back to them for our future legal needs. But that's another way to not get inundated with all the expenses and paperwork. Just hold off on doing some of that stuff as much as you can.
Well, and I don't know if people are thinking this, but you don't necessarily need to have a lawyer or a CPA on staff. So a lot of times this is for hire, by the hour kind of work that you have these people do for you, and maybe have them on speed dial, so you could reach out when you need them, but they're not they're not part of your organization necessarily, right?
Exactly.
And when you say nonprofit, when you say you don't make money, you can make. I mean, you take donations, you do get money, but it's not considered. So maybe explain that. When does it become profit? There's a lot of these quote unquote nonprofits where the C-suite folks of the nonprofit get paid quite well. So, how does that work?
Rory may be able to speak to this better than I can, but
maybe you guys don't know. I don't know, because I don't know. I
could just say though that you are allowed to earn money because you have expenses, and you may have staff,
including
that you need
salary.
To pay, and yes, and if you have some kind of events you hold, or if you're doing mailings to people to get more money, or something, there are expenses that you have to cover. So you are allowed to make money, but you can't. The goal can't be to make a profit, make more and more money, like a profit-making company. And I'm going to hand it over to Rory to take over.
Yeah, Rory, do you have any feedback on any of that?
I want to be clear.
You're not a lawyer.
I am not a lawyer, and the law firm I work at doesn't specialize in this area of law. So this is very much just coming from talking with EFA groups that have considered incorporation, and often the type of restraint that comes with it is the various amount of paperwork, selecting board members, and these initial obligations that are frankly substantially more than a for-profit has. An LLC is generally protecting your personal bank account from your business's expenses and loans and financial obligations. So a 501c3 or a nonprofit has similar protections, but also obligations to fit within that. One of which that I think is important to highlight is for 501c3s specifically must remain nonpartisan and not electioneer. So if you decide to go that way, your donors can get a tax deduction and supporting your work, but you can't weigh in on elections or political parties. And some groups find that too restrictive and opt for other nonprofit statuses. And yeah, it comes with all these additional restrictions that can be very difficult to navigate. I'd say most groups in the EFA are not registered nonprofits or not incorporated even. I think many of them remain unincorporated because the work they're doing only raises to a level of risk that they're personally comfortable being affected by, like paying for a domain name, or that level of financial commitment. But the other big opportunity that a lot of folks, once they start getting bigger, they start needing to care about income and expenses more, is finding a fiscal sponsorship. And that also opens up a lot of grant opportunities without having to go through all of those same obligations of incorporating. You can find a 501c3 that is willing to kind of take on your donations, usually for a small fee, and kind of take care of a lot of that compliance on your behalf. My group, Cyper Collective, got a financial sponsor through Open Collective, which listeners might be familiar with from open source projects, often use that as a funder. So we were able to take some donations through there that were tax deductible and support our work that way without having to go through all the incorporation headaches. So yeah, I want to echo, a lot of organizers will say, avoid incorporation until it's absolutely necessary and, not a moment later. Because yeah, that's a more work and effort being dedicated to work that isn't mission-driven work. Filling out paperwork is not going to have the impact that is the whole reason you're organizing, right?
Right.
And it's not as rewarding.
Sure.
We got our taxes done. Yay.
Yeah.
All right, last question before we go, and I'll make this kind of open-ended because we've talked about a lot of things today. So what are some parting thoughts? Anything else that you'd like to tell the audience about, or maybe any other, anybody out there is considering doing this, any advice you might want to give? What are your parting thoughts here? Rory, let's start with you.
Yeah, so this is reiterating a bit. Don't hesitate to reach out to me and the organizing team at EFF, organizing@EFF.org. We're happy to help answer some initial questions in getting started. And the other thing is just getting started, not feeling too intimidated or like an imposter for thinking you can challenge powerful people, because powerful people are still just people, and you have rights that you need to assert regularly. So I think getting organized, getting started, and it can start with something small and regular, but just getting something going initially. Yeah, encourage everyone to try it. Worst case scenario is you meet some cool people. So yeah, not a lot.
Which is actually a pretty good case.
Yeah, exactly.
If that's the worst that could happen, that's great, actually. Yeah. All right, Chris, how about you? Any parting thoughts?
I must say I have met a lot of cool people, so that is very true. I think just getting out there and talking to people, telling them what you want to do. If there are groups that are doing what you want to do, join up with them. You can learn a lot. You can help them. You can work together. Even if there aren't groups that are doing your thing, if they're related, say if you're interested in privacy, maybe security groups, tech groups, you can really learn a lot of things from each other. And I did ask someone for advice when I was kind of starting out, and they just gave me some simple advice that was try. And I think that's good advice. I mean, it's not very specific, but just try. I think that's all you can do.
The other thing I really encourage people is to not be shy. The reason I know so many folks at like EFA or ACLU or whomever is that I just contacted them and kept contacting them until they would respond to me. And so I think there's like kind of this habit that we have that somehow these people are unapproachable or whatever it is. But like they're people just like the rest of us. And so I encourage people to give things a try and not feel like you don't need a degree in political science to get up in front of the legislator. So that's what I would recommend.
All right. Thank you guys so much. That was a really interesting discussion, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your stories. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us. It was really, really fun program to be on.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yes, thank you so much for having us.
I'm really glad to have had them on the show. That was a great discussion, and I hope you found that inspirational. And again, you don't have to start your own group. You don't have to be the leader of something if you don't want to be. There are probably groups in your area today that are doing things like this. Certainly, if you're in a large enough metropolitan area, I certainly encourage you to go to the EFA's website. Again, EFF.org/EFA will get you there. There's also a link, of course, in the show notes. You can see what it's about. You can get links to other groups and see what kind of things they're doing, maybe as inspiration or as examples. But I also encourage you to try like meetup.com. That's a great place to find groups in your area with similar interests. But maybe, just maybe, if you're really passionate about something and you don't find somebody locally doing something already, maybe you can start up your own thing. And actually, after this interview, I'm considering working with the EFA myself. I'm not sure how that's going to work since it's kind of mostly just me, but I'm definitely looking into that and something I'm going to consider doing as well. So real quick, I think it was Rory who mentioned the Earn It Act. That's EARN space IT Act. It stands for something, as they all do. Some sort of retronym, as always. It's actually been around for many years. It keeps coming back perennially. It's another one of those, think of the children bills where, we must protect our children from bad things on the internet. And of course, it's really hard to argue with that. But the net effect of this bill is essentially ending true end-to-end encryption and ending privacy and snooping on our devices. And it's just, again, it's another one of those good intentions pave the way to hell kind of things. But this bill just will not go away. Every year somebody reintroduces it, and it's trying to make its way through Congress again. I think it just made out of one of the Senate committees. So if that is something you would like to look into, I've got a link in the show notes where you can find out more about the Earn It Act, and EFF has, of course, a nice write-up about their objections to that. Patrons, as usual, will get some bonus content with my guests. We'll have some extra Q&A with Rory and Chris. Freddie actually had to drop, but you will get some bonus questions with them. And if you'd like to become a patron, there's a lot of great benefits for doing that. Go to fdsd.me/support, and you'll see not only information about joining on Patreon, but some other ways that you might be able to help me do what I do as well, if you'd like to do so. But on that page, I also maintain a list of other ways that you can help support my efforts to reach more people and educate the masses about cybersecurity and privacy. So next week, we're going to be talking to some folks about hacking satellites. And they've actually got a Capture the Flag tournament, which is a hackers tournament, for hacking an actual satellite orbiting the Earth. And that satellite was launched last weekend successfully from a Falcon rocket. It is now at the International Space Station and will be deployed, in the next couple weeks, I think, just in time for DEF CON, where this CTF will be held. So we'll be talking about that, as well as why satellites are so important and why this sort of effort is crucial to making sure that all of the satellites are more secure. I also got another interview with Josh Corman coming up, and I will be talking soon with somebody from the EFF who is running for office in California. And we'll talk about several different interesting policy issues. Lots of great stuff coming up. So if you have not subscribed, now would be a great time to do that so you don't miss any of that goodness. All right, one more thing before we go. As I promised early on, and I've been teasing for several weeks now, I will be starting next week launching a new campaign to distribute my version 2.0 Dragon Challenge coins. If you have not seen these things, I encourage you to go to fdsd.me/coin2, COIN, and the number 2. Now, this will take you to an article related to a promotion I did last year, the first round of giving some of these away. But moving forward, I'm going to be doing it a little bit differently. Again, along the lines of what I was talking about before the show, I want to encourage my audience to go out and do good deeds. And I'm going to keep going with the dragon medieval knight theme as I do it. But instead of making this a short time thing where I do it mostly for patrons, I'm actually going to be creating an ongoing program where I look for you guys to go out into the world and do good deeds. And I will give you a method by which you can nominate yourself or even perhaps nominate someone else to receive a challenge coin. Because that's the real spirit of these coins. I want these coins to be something that you earn, something that I bequeath or bestow upon people who I believe deserve it as a thank you, as a way for me kind of to reward that behavior and hopefully encourage that behavior. So I'm not going to give all the details now, but I will give them all next week. So stay tuned for that. All right, that will wrap up the show for the week. Thank you for tuning in. Take care out there. Stay safe, everybody. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.